I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle, along with Juan Williams, Jesse Waters, Dana Perino, and Greg Gutfeld. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. We begin with the breaking news today in the special counsel's Russia probe. 13 Russians and 3 Russian entities have been charged with an elaborate plot to interfere with our 2016 presidential election. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein made the announcement earlier, and there's a lot to break down. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has all the details. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Kimberly. I was at that news conference at Main Justice, the Justice Department headquarters here in Washington, when they released this 37-page indictment. The charges are against 13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian organizations for allegedly defrauding the United States, but specifically the illegal use of social media to interfere in the election. In this particular case, to support the candidacy of Donald Trump and to disparage Hillary Clinton. One of the key things we learned today is that this operation really predates the confirmation of either of the leading candidates in the presidential election. It began in 2014, which is when it was seeded in St. Petersburg, Russia, by an individual who was closely aligned with the Russian president. But then it really kicked off and picked up steam in mid-2016 when they took about 6 people and specifically tasked them with the Russian interference in our election. Here's the Deputy Attorney General from earlier today.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
I've read the indictment twice now, and it's important to note that anyone who is connected to the Trump campaign is unidentified in the indictment. They're referred to simply as members, volunteers, or supporters of the Trump campaign. Since that announcement today, the president has put out a tweet, and it reads in part, "Russia started their anti-U.S. campaign in 2014 long before I announced that I would run for president. The results of the election were not impacted. The Trump campaign did nothing wrong. No collusion." The Deputy Attorney General made clear today that at least on this digital piece, they found the Russian interference, but they did not find any American was willingly cooperating with the Russians to amplify that effort. But the Deputy Attorney General was silent on other outstanding issues that may remain in the Russia case, Kimberly.
All right, Catherine, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Tremendous developments today, Dana, and in a way kind of unexpected that this was going to come out today, quite revealing, and a number of people indicted. What's your takeaway?
Well, a couple of things. One, it was such a surprise, and partly that's because while there are lots of leaks in other parts of the government, the Bob Mueller investigation, it pretty is airtight. Like, nobody knew it was coming. And in fact, when the press conference was announced that it was happening at 1:15, pretty much nobody knew what it was about. Some people speculated that Rod Rosenstein was going to resign. Obviously, that didn't happen. And actually, today's development probably ensures that Rod Rosenstein is not in any danger of being fired anytime soon. I think it also proves that Mitt Romney was right. Remember in the campaign when he said to President Obama that the Russians were a geopolitical enemy, and Obama dismissed it? Turns out that in 2014, this is when all of this started. We do know that everybody's been saying that the Russians try to do this all the time.
Sure.
So it's possible that maybe the Obama administration was monitoring it in 2014 and didn't think it was that big a deal. But it certainly ramps up. And as Juan has said before, there is frustration on behalf of the Democrats that the president seemed to not have done more at the time. I think it's a solid indictment. I also think that it proves that Russian meddling was not a hoax. And so because the global threat hearing that happened this week there was a focus on this about what's happening in 2018. Hopefully now, and the president says in his statement today, or the press secretary's statement, that this is a time for everybody to work together to figure out a way to push back against the Russians. Also, for those of you Twitter bots in St. Petersburg who are tweeting me during the election, I could just,
oh my goodness,
I could say it, but I won't. I won't, but it really does. It was a horrible thing to go through.
Yeah.
All of anybody who was
targeted,
part of the campaign or reporting on the campaign considered influential, was just absolutely bombarded by these jerks.
All right. Well, now they've gotten to the bottom of it, so there's been some expeditious justice with these indictments. Greg, just want to talk to you a second about, the president coming out right away with his own communication strategy in terms of tweeting about it and putting the postmark back to 2014, saying, look, this does not invalidate the credibility, the authenticity, legitimacy of my campaign, my election as United States president. And this predated anything as it relates to my campaign.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how the goalposts are being moved. The people celebrating this, pretending that meddling is collusion, is being dishonest. Anybody who says this is proof of anything beyond meddling is lying. Look, Russians, meddling is their baseball. That's their pastime. As somebody married...
Apple pie and meddling.
Exactly. As someone married to a Russian, I know this is the case. And she happens to be in Moscow right now. I don't know if that's a coincidence.
She's getting a quickie divorce, based on your comments.
Here's the deal. They coordinated rallies to support Trump, and they coordinated rallies to protest Trump. So they're like that weird character in a soap opera that's trying to break up a married couple and sow discord among them and make their lives ruined. But we know this is what they do. They are the Globe's trolls. And the thing is, we have to be very stoic about this, because every time we get emotional about this stuff, and we have been emotional about this for a year, screaming at each other about whether the Russians did this and were we involved, were we colluding, they were winning. This was the whole point.
Right.
That's why they supported Trump, and then that's why they supported the protesters. That's why they go after you, and then that's why they start putting out emails this
But
way.
this is what they do.
Yeah,
They've been doing it forever.
So the thing is, I mean, who remember what's the name? Rocky and Bullwinkle, who were their villains? Natasha and Boris. So we knew this even when we were kids. My point is this: when we allowed them to separate us, that was a problem. And it's a problem we can't do to them because they only have a single ideology, which is being Russian.
And also don't really have elections.
Yeah, exactly. We have a bifurcated...
You mean 99.9% of the vote for Putin was rigged?
But the bottom line is we are plagued by team sport politics that divides on every issue, and they know that. So they know how to pick the teams and have them go at each other just like a soap opera villain. I almost admire it.
You almost do, and I really appreciate a reference to Natasha and Boris. Okay, so Jesse, what do you make of today's developments and the communication piece from the president and from the press secretary?
Well, he said there's no collusion, and it doesn't look like there's any witting collusion, and that was very specific. For people that are still saying that there may have been collusion in the indictment, I read the indictment. It was a little boring, not very sexy. But at the end, it said...
But that's what the dossier is.
One of these... Yes. Right. One of these people that were Russian emailed a Trump campaign official 3 times, offering locations in Florida to have a rally. It does not even mention if the Trump campaign official emailed back. So that's all you have. They communicated unwittingly. It could have been one-way communication. I'm not going to say that there was no collusion yet. I mean, there's still no evidence of collusion according to this indictment. So what they did was basically information warfare. They set up a bunch of bots. It was only in the tens of millions of dollars, not that expensive. And they buy a bunch of ads on Facebook. And when you think of how sophisticated it wasn't that sophisticated. It was rudimentary. They would hire a person to dress up like Hillary, put a little blonde wig on, and wear a prison jumpsuit and stand at a Trump rally. So when I was, I asked one of these people, you want to do an interview? And she said, yes. And now I understand why.
Because that really happened?
she was paid. But to your point, too, this was not...
You're going to be called to testify. Way to go.
This was pro-Trump for a while, and it was pro-Bernie Sanders for a while, and it was anti-Hillary, and then it became anti-Trump after the election. So the point was to sow discord, and that was effective. But I would say the Democrats are helping the Russians sow discord because of the dossier, because of the constant accusations of treason. And if you boil it all up, I would say the dossier and these crazy allegations and the $1 billion Hillary spent on advertising and the biased mainstream media propaganda was much more influential than a few hundred Twitter bots and a few silly rallies held in New York City after the election.
All right, Juan, let me guess. You see it differently.
Oh, yeah, I do. I think that we have a situation here where we don't know the end. I mean, this is clearly still in midstream in terms of what Mueller is doing.
I agree.
But I would say that, as we heard from Rod Rosenstein, there's no direct evidence of any complicity by any specific person in the Trump campaign. We don't know. They said at times, for example, you had people in the Trump campaign who would retweet a lot of the efforts that were being made by the Russians, but again, unknowingly. And then you had people who were suggesting to them, hey, target these swing states, go after Virginia, look at Colorado, etc. But again, maybe not knowing that you're dealing with Russians who are interfering. The big point that I would register here as a takeaway is that President Trump has said repeatedly that this is fake news, this is a fraud. There was no Russian interference in this election. Well, now we know. They're definitely, the intelligence community has said it, Robert Mueller has said it, we've got an indictment. There was Russian interference in the 2016 election.
You know why he's saying that? He's referring to collusion. So you can have your meddling. That's what he's saying. Yeah, but I wasn't, what he said, you know what he meant. He said, I wasn't involved. I wasn't involved. I had nothing to do with this. We won fair and square. That's what he's saying. The fact that Russians helped us win is a hoax, is what he's saying.
And that's not true, because Russians did help him win. Because
no, they're saying there's no effect.
They said there's no
on the outcome of the election.
No. What they're saying is that Russians were promoting propagandistic perspective.
Did not affect the election?
It did affect the election. It affected our conversations. It affected the way we talk.
So now you're broadening the word effect.
Even when we think about, you were saying, oh, you know, they only spent so much money. Remember, they're really behind the hacking of Hillary Clinton's campaign, Podesta and all that, and spreading of all the rumors that get picked up by mainstream media that followed the whole business about her emails and all that. That's all amplified by what the Russians were doing. But on a fun level, I disagree with you, Jesse. I think it is a fun 37-page read, because they've got some, you know, you talk about dressing up like Hillary, put her in the cage, lock her up. I think that's pretty hilarious. And then they got this thing about, if you're a woke black person, Clinton is Satan, and we can't vote for the lesser of two devils. And they've also big supporters of Jill Stein, and who I think might be in some trouble herself. But I think that when you look at the way that they approach our election and us as American people, they think that we are kind of dumbcuffs.
Well, no, the reason is, Juan, is what I said. They don't have the vulnerabilities that we have. There's no way we can do this. Now, we can go, you know, mess with Ukraine and do things like that. And by the way, we do those things. So they look at us and they go, and I have a feeling that they look at what they're doing as defensive maneuvers, finding out things that protect them, which is, you know, what a lot of people do, not condoning it. But the interesting thing to me is, I grew up in the 70s, and I remember how Cold Warriors were so mocked by the left, academia, media, Democrats, over the Russian threat when they were 8 times larger than they were now. It's so refreshing to see all these Democrats coming out and saying how evil this evil empire is. It's a little too late.
I'd like to add to that, because under Obama's watch, you had Russia invade Ukraine, you had Russia set up bases in Syria now, military bases, and propped up Assad when they gassed their own people. They shipped weapons and anti-aircraft missiles to Iran. And Obama didn't do that much. He wasn't that tough on Russia. And all of a sudden, from 2014 until 2017, a few hundred Russians with maybe $10 to $20 million did a little disinformation warfare during the election, called Hillary names, and dressed up like Hillary, and, you know, retweeted a bunch of propaganda. And all of a sudden now there's indictments 4 years later, and everyone's crying like it's a new Cold War. I just feel like when we really needed the Democrats to help Republicans fight the Cold War, they were nowhere to be found. But the minute you start messing around with Hillary, then it's like, you know, you got to fight these guys.
But nevertheless, there will be a geopolitical fallout, and also in areas like Syria.
Wait till I get home.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. Good luck to you, Greg. My money's on her. Funny new developments on the Florida school massacre. That's next. Stay with us.